Oh, yeah, well, welcome everyone to this concept mapping session, community concept mapping session. My name is Bill Tang. I'm at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and I co-chair this agriculture and climate cluster with my co-chair, Brian Wee. So today it will be a double session with a break in between at 3:30. And you can all see the agenda. So before we get into the first part, which is just a short history of the cluster for those of you who are new to this, Megan will give some, I guess, logistics related help tips before we go on.
Yes, so hi everyone, my name is Megan Carter. I'm ESIP's Community Director. I may have met most of you already, maybe not, but it's nice to meet you. I have the privilege of supporting this cluster on a regular basis, and I'm excited to be with them today. My role is to support this virtual meeting. So before we kick this session off, I wanted to remind you of a few things. First of all, this session is being recorded. It's also being live streamed to YouTube. So hello to all of you who are hopefully watching this stream. As you know, we are using Zoom, those of you who are in the Zoom. And for most of us, you should see a toolbar at the bottom of your window where you'll see a button for chat and a button for the participant list. These are probably the two most important buttons outside of the mute button, which should be on your bottom left in most cases. If you're not familiar with these or you have questions about these, let me know. When you are not speaking, please mute yourself. We have a policy of cameras on during discussion if you're comfortable with that, although you are not at no point required to have your camera on, and cameras off when people are presenting. That just makes it easier to see what's going on. The leads here can tell you what is the best way to ask a question, whether you should type it in the chat or you should raise your virtual hand or just unmute and speak up when invited to do so. There is a button, it should be, again, it depends on how you're calling in, but there's a button to look at either gallery view and see everybody's small cameras or speaker view and see, the big shared screen and just a few cameras across the top. It's good to know about those two different options. When somebody's screen sharing, it won't be as important to pay attention to those options. The last thing I want to remind you of, and you can let me know if I forgot anything, is the community participation guidelines. This is ESIP's code of conduct. You agree to it by participating in this meeting. And I just want to pop the link into the chat box that you can go to this link to learn more about it, and the link to report if you believe you're experiencing unacceptable behavior is located at that URL. So with that, I'll turn it over for the fun part.
Okay, if I may, I'll quickly jump in here, just a very quick word to all the participants online. So a favor, I'm asking a favor of everyone who has joined us for this session. By the way, sorry, my name is Brian Wee. If you look on your Kiko chat screen, you have the notes tab, which shows you the detailed agenda. Now scroll down on the detailed agenda document under the notes tab. Scroll down all the way to the detailed agenda on page 2. You will see a table of contents with all the sessions and activities listed there for the next few hours. If you could, there is a link under the time slot between 2:05 and 2:15 that says session notes. Do you mind clicking on that link? It opens up a Google Doc, and if you don't mind, we would appreciate you listing your name there. And that is the document that you should be taking notes if you feel the wish to take notes during the session, so that you can contribute to the community knowledge that we're going to try to capture. Okay, sorry, Bill. Back to you.
Okay, sorry. Couldn't find my unmute button here. Yeah, so this is I'm really excited. I mean, a little bit nervous. This is the kind of the first like truly virtual meeting. I mean, same with everybody. So if you had a chance to look at the agenda, there's a lot of exciting things coming up, including we will formally announce this competition to create your concept map. Okay, so we'll get to that in detail later. So before we get into a lot of this other stuff, I just want to take a few minutes to, particularly since we'll have new people joining us this time, is to go through kind of a brief history of this cluster, agriculture and climate, and how we got here from the initial kickoff meeting back in 2013 at the summer meeting in Chapel Hill. So I'm gonna, let's see. Share my screen.
So Bill, from my perspective, you're still understandable, but you're a little choppy. So if there's anything you can do to, I don't know, be closer to the microphone or speak in a certain direction, that would help us.
Okay, so you're hearing the words not smooth coming through?
Yeah, you're just in and out a little bit, but I think you sound a little clearer now. Whoa.
Okay. Okay, so this is the only PowerPoint slide I'm going to show. This is actually a brand new logo that Brian put together for our cluster. So it is, if you go to the agenda, there's a presentation link there, and that will get you this this slide if you want one. Now, because this is a session on concept maps, so I'm going to tell the story of this cluster's history using actually a concept map. So here is. Okay, so this is a concept map that, of course, it's way too dense for me to go through in detail. Doing, oh, sorry. To go through in detail in the next few minutes, but I'm just going to highlight a few things to kind of trace out how we got here. Now, first, now I did take some liberties in putting in certain things that shouldn't be in a concept map, right? So in particular, I'm using these triples as an annotation device, right? So the color aqua is a collaborator, for example. So so this is not necessarily a model of a good concept map to follow, which when we get to the part next in the second session of this second part of this session, when you break out and to develop a concept map, so just keep that in mind. What you're seeing is the map, the concept map as shown in CMap Tools, the desktop version, which is one of several concept map tools, and then we'll talk about that also later in the session. Now, this concept map will be made available after the session. So if you are interested to explore this in more detail, in particular, a lot of these URLs or resource links in many of these nodes, so you can do that. So right now, I'm just going to go quickly through to give you an idea how we got to where we are. The main thing, okay, before I do that, let me just say that the yellow here represent basically a timeline, right? Mostly by the order by the summer meeting and winter meeting. The blue or the aqua, which I mentioned before, are the collaborators that we worked with in all these cases, and then the green is some kind of outcome from these activities. Okay. So the main thing I want to get across is that this is an example of using a concept map to trace or the traceability of whatever you want to show via concept map, right? So in this case, it's not data to decisions, and not tracing data to decision, but tracing from how we began at 2013 with the USDA long-term agroecological research network folks or group through all the way through down to our current session here. And the traceability, if you follow the nodes that has these red italicized terms, that's how we got to from event to event, activity to activity to where we are today. So basically from LTAR, we got to the climate hubs of USDA, the Northern Plains in this case, and then to the US Climate Data Initiative, CDI, the related program, Climate Resilience Toolkit, CRT. And then over the next several years, we hosted a number of these CRT workshops where we invited speakers to present on their work, which then become kind of incipient case studies that we put into this, what we call the CRT pipeline, into eventually to the CRT repository. They have a case study repository. And then in the 2017 is the one in our fourth workshop where we were able to shepherd a particular recipient case study all the way through to be published in the CRT repository. So that's the link over here. And then this link is the repository itself. And then this is actually a poster that was done by Ellie Davis, our fellow, for the RDA conference last year. And if you get a chance, take a look at it. It's just an amazing piece of artwork. The 2018 is, I think, a milepost for us because at that time, Brian had just completed his planned short cluster, the data to decision for climate resilience cluster. And we then collaborate on hosting this session on 2018 on a lot of the topics that we will be talking about and that we have been talking about leading up to this current session. And so for that one, we were focusing on this hypothetical future version of the US Climate Resilience Toolkit. For example, machine-enabled technologies that enhance discovery and reuse of climate resilience solutions. And that led to, after that meeting, led to our proposal, the ESIP Lab 2018 program, which became a project, and we presented the result of the project at the 2019 winter meeting in January. Oh, by the way, let me back up a little bit. So the CRT repository is of these case studies that the CRT group maintains. And these case studies are all instances of stories or narratives. And stories and narratives are really central to how that staff, the CRT staff, put together these case study for people to use. And I'll add a concept map that we will be talking about a lot this afternoon is another instance of the story or narrative. And Brian will provide more details about concept map shortly afterwards. And then, so we presented the results of the the ESIP lab at the 2019 meeting. And at that same meeting, we also hosted a soil state integration challenge session, which also identified many of the same kinds of issues that we're dealing with today, focusing on soil data. And then over the subsequent several months, from January to the summer meeting last year at Tacoma, we worked with the East Disaster Lifecycle Cluster to kind of focus down onto kind of soil data in the context of wildfires. And that's kind of how the wildfire theme for today came about. So we weren't able to, for various reasons, in the 2019 Tacoma meeting to actually host the session, but we did arrange to meet with Catherine Rowden of the NOAA National Weather Service, and we had a chat about mutual interests and mutual how we can collaborate. And Catherine will be providing an overview on wildfires and post-wildfire response after Brian. So that's coming up also. And then, of course, this past January at the Easter Winter Meeting in Bethesda, that's when we kind of began in earnest in working on this experimental community concept mapping activity with the wildfire as a theme. And if you go to this link here, that's where we have collected most of the body of work that we've done so far from basically February until now. So here we are. You're here today, and there was a little detour in June when we at the U.S. Forest Service NASA Pitch Fest, we did pitch our idea of using concept map for connecting data models and tools, in this case to the Forest Service decision making process for wildfire mitigation and emergency response. So I think I'm going to stop here. If there's a quick question, we can take that. Otherwise, I'm going to pass it on to Brian to, well, we're going to do a quick poll if there's no questions. But first, is there a question that I think we have time for one quick one? Okay, hearing none, and again, you can download this if you're interested later on to look through this in more detail, particularly the resources linked here. Then let's go to, we're going to do the first of our polls for today. So Brian, you're gonna drive this? Because I think I don't have the.
So go back to your Chico chat screen and the Slido tab. The poll has been activated.
Okay. Yeah, so if you go to the Slido, the tab on the top to the right, you can still see my screen. So, so we'll have 3 short questions, and within the next 5 minutes. So, first question is, which of the following motivate you to attend this session? So let's take 45 seconds, and everybody can check their boxes. You can check more than one, and then we'll see the results in real time.
Okay, this is Brian. About 1/3 of you who have joined us for this session have responded. So there were 13 responses. We're waiting for a little bit more before we close the poll.
And if anybody is not there, if you've closed your Kiko chat tab, I'm pasting that back into the window. It does take a moment to navigate to that tab to be able to answer. So you would click there, and then you need to click the 4th tab on the right on the top that says Slido.
So for everybody to see the results in real time, can I do that, or do you have to do it, Brian or Megan?
So everybody can do it. Once, if for example, Bill, right now, if you submit your reasons, you will see the summary of everybody else's response. And
okay,
in fact, those people
okay, so I'm gonna click all 4, so I won't change anything. Okay, so everybody sees their own as it happens. Good. Okay, I think Is it still pretty much stabilized, huh?
Yeah, I think we have stabilized at 23 responses.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the next one.
And so most of you indicated, you're here primarily because you're going to do the concept mapping. That's the most important thing to you. Okay. I will advance to the next slide then. Should I?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the next poll is now active on your screen.
So this one, you can just pick one, right? Based on the history of the story of the cluster. We just like to know if you'll be interested to participate or how likely you will be interested.
And we're up to 20 responses now.
Okay, so you want it for me?
Vote.
So I guess in order for me to see this, I have to pick one, right? Okay. We can always take my hour later just to see.
Okay, so we have a score somewhere between 3 and 4, 3.4, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I move on us to the
yes,
next?
please.
Okay. And the last.
Yeah, so this one will allow a little bit more time because we like to get your input, whether you think you might want to join the cluster or participate. Just what you think the cluster should be working on, either expanding something currently working on or something new. So interested in your ideas.
And so, folks on the call, just a logistical note that you can enter more than one word. You can enter a short phrase of less than or equal to 50 characters. So you could do a 2-worded reply or 1-word reply, and you can submit multiple ideas. So after you hit a word or a short phrase, hit enter, and you can enter more thereafter.
And one of the things we're really interested in, and also one of the main ESA goals is to, of course, foster inter or multi or the better word will be transdisciplinary collaboration. And Brian later on he'll get into that in a subsequent poll as well.
Yeah, so that's a good idea. I'm going to say it out loud. Ellie said if you can't access Slido on your computer for whatever reason, you could use your phone. You go to Slido, sli.do, and then enter this code she put in the chat, Ag Climate 2020.
And just to tag on to that, a lot of the sessions probably will be using Slido, so it's a useful thing to have on your phone if you're not able to use it on your computer. So even if you don't want to participate in this session's polls, you should be able to with all of them. And the way that you find the code is that when you look at the Slido, or they can just ask for the event code from the organizer. That's probably the easiest thing.
So this is Brian. I have shared my screen to show, most of you can see this on your own screens to see what the responses are, but I thought I would just put it on my screen and share it just in case any of you are having difficulties. Okay, do we want to? Hey, Bill, I think we have reached a good point to pause. I think people are pausing at here about 17 responses. Did you want to give a comment about?
Yeah, well, so it's very interesting, right? It's definitely one particular topic that stands out amongst everything else. So we haven't, I mean, directly addressed this, but they certainly very current the topic, and but a lot of the things that we've been doing, so they has relationship connections to this. So so this is good. We definitely will, we'll be talking about this in the upcoming telecons. So yeah, thank you for this. So I think we can, if it doesn't look like there'll be any other changes. So shall we move to your next, your talk next, Ryan?
Yes, let's do that. So what I will do now is I will continue my screen share and I will show you what's next. Now, you can all access these, you can always get to the presentations yourselves anytime later also. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring it up on the screen so that we can share the we can look at the presentation together. And unfortunately, I had this window up previously. It shut itself down, so I'm re-bringing up my Prezi. So right now, you should be seeing in a few minutes the presentation for the next session of this breakout of this ESIP session. Now, so we're going to talk about concept maps, right? And so this is for those of you who have joined us yesterday at the Introduction to Ontologies tutorial. There was a little bit of a mention about concept maps and how concept maps relate to knowledge graphs. So for those of you who work in kind of the informatics space, if you have heard of knowledge graphs, you might have heard it in the context of things like the Google knowledge graph, right? When you, for example, when you do a search in Google and for example, you do a search for President Obama, and on the right-hand side of the screen, the picture of President Obama comes up with a short description of of his achievements and when he was in office. That stuff on the right-hand side of the screen is from the Google Knowledge Graph proprietary engine, right? So concept maps are related to knowledge graphs in a way that I will explain here towards the end of this presentation. We will not go in detail about what knowledge graphs are, but just to note here that there is a relationship between knowledge graphs, concept maps, and ontologies. Again, so for those of you who had joined us yesterday for the ontology session, there's actually a relationship between all of those, right? And this, what you're seeing on the screen here is actually a poster that will be, well, will be shown at the showcase on Friday. That's a poster session. So this is the same poster, well, with a little bit of modification. We are not going to go through the whole poster right now because it's too massive, a bit too much information. And I would like to echo something that Bill said earlier, like the concept map, kind of concept map that you see here is in some ways is a bad representation of what a good concept map should be, but for the sake of presenting it in a cohesive manner without the help of a computer, I've put everything on the screen splashed in one layout for you. But again, just a mental note that, and this relates to the competition that we will announce later. This is not necessarily a good example of a concept map. All right, this is maybe an example of more of a narrative. Right, Bill had mentioned the word narrative earlier. So you can use concept maps also to tell a story, like Bill did, right? And to tell a narrative. And so this representation is more in the form of a narrative. Now let's quickly, if you look at my cursor, we're going to do this. We're going to explore this concept map here, right? And then we're going to go down to this part of the concept map to talk about social ecological frameworks. And then we're going to talk about how all that is tied up in systems thinking. And then we're going to come back to modeling data to decisions. So without further ado, let's start our journey at the top left-hand side of the screen. Now, so a concept map is a collection of concepts where these concepts are connected by relationships. And sometimes some people call the relationships linking words, or some might call them predicates, right? So I hope this is, in fact, from what you've seen already, I hope this is now evident to you what a concept map is, right? So this is a concept map about a concept map. Concept maps tend to be hierarchically structured. And like I mentioned before earlier, right? Concept maps have a role, they have some role, which we will not go into too much details, but they have a role in ontology development. And they also have a big role in knowledge representation, right? So knowledge representation is a very interesting area, of course, that, you know, a lot of the AI folks, well, at least a lot of the AI folks and natural language processing folks tend to work in. And so this also, knowledge representation also has something to do with knowledge graphs. Again, we will touch on that just a little bit, but not get into that too much. All right. So now that you have a kind of a rough idea of what concept maps are, right? So what did we do? What did the Ag and Climate Cluster do with these concept maps, right? What we did over the past few months, as Bill gave you kind of a preview too, was we developed a bunch of concept maps. And in order to focus our efforts on a few areas, we decided to work on social environmental risk management use cases. And so this gels very well with our initial exploration, as Bill had explained, about why this cluster had done some work with the agriculture, with the US Climate Resilience Toolkit. So we had done quite a bit of thinking about climate resilience. We had done quite a bit of thinking about how you use narratives in the Climate Resilience Toolkit to tell the story of how a community might use data to inform how it would protect itself against things like sea level rise or the effects of extreme precipitation or the effects of very big changes in ambient temperature, right? So these are the users of narratives. Now, so what we did, of course, was we, having had that experience of using narratives to tell the story of adaptation, we decided to transfer that kind of experience to document it in the form of a concept map. And so that's how we got here. But furthermore, when we tried playing around with this experiment of using concept maps, we wanted to assess the utility of using concept maps to establish traceability between data and decisions. The concept of traceability, of course, is essential in many of our work, because especially if you're working for a federal agency where typically your budgets are of course contingent on the successful appropriations from Congress, and the question gets asked every time when you request for more budget. What good has come out of the previous budget that was allocated to you? And so, in order to answer the question of what good has your monies, the taxpayer monies, done, you want to establish traceability between the data products, for example, that NASA might have been responsible for fostering and producing, right? You want to establish that traceability between those data products and what good it has done for society. So has it helped a community to better plan for an impending flood? Has it helped the community to make itself more resilient against sudden changes in temperature, right? And that's where agriculture comes in. And so what we have done is, in order to establish these traceability stories, oops, sorry about that a bit. In order to establish these traceability stories, we have done a couple of use cases. The use cases focus on this part of the concept map where my cursor is hovering. These use cases have currently mostly focused on wildfire related, which is where Catherine Rowden is going to talk a little bit about. So the wildfire related use cases have focused on either something called the burn area emergency response, which tells you a little bit about the area that we're dealing with, which is immediately after a wildfire. The government is at federal and state levels are activated to respond to the fire as an emergency response in order to prevent things like debris flow and flooding. And this is something that Catherine will go into, so I will not talk too much about that. But we also have another use case which talks about the wildland urban interface and how communities can use Landsat data. Again, both these use cases trace to Landsat data. How wildland urban communities can use Landsat data to inform them of how they might want to plan to mitigate the chances of a wildfire. So those are two use cases that we have developed. There is another use case that we developed right here where my cursor is hovering over, related to watershed nitrogen pollution here in the Chesapeake Bay. And that tells a story of how you can use, again, this is a NASA data product, the NLDAS, the North American Land Data Assimilation System, how you can use that data product, the precipitation NLDAS, to feed into an EPA model that quantifies the risks of nutrient runoff, for example, from chicken farming in the Chesapeake, around the Chesapeake Bay, in the event of heavy rainfalls. So that's one area that we've worked on briefly, and that's one of the use cases. With the University of Texas at Austin, we also started a new use case on the Guadalupe Blanco watershed. Again, this has to do with nutrient pollution, nitrogen pollution, both through the groundwater and also above. This is surface runoff from, say, from surface runoff to the watershed, and what are the potential implications. And we probably have another use case starting off on avian conservation. This one is in collaboration with the USGS, Jessica Burnett, who is online with us right now. So I will go through the rest of this slide very quickly and pause for questions. But having given you a kind of an overview of the types of use cases that we've been working on, These are all use cases where, it's social. It's an example of a social ecological system or social environmental system where my cursor is hovering over. So this is a framework. There are many such frameworks to understand social ecological systems or social environmental systems, right? What's typical in this framework is that on one side of the framework, at least for this framework here, you have processes, you have ecological processes, fast ecological processes related to biogeochemical cycles in water, for example, in soil, where my cursor is hovering over, and kind of the slower processes related to things like changes in soil composition over decades, for example, to really large scale and tend to be slower moving processes like climate forcing, right? So the same goes for the other side of the framework, social properties. Again, when we talk about these social environmental challenges, it doesn't make sense to talk about these challenges in the absence of things like trade policy and land use policy, for example, and even things like income distribution. And so for those of you who are familiar with the 1988 Brotherton framework, for example, this little figure here of human activities, that actually was from the Brotherton framework. So you guys should be a bit familiar with what this is talking about. And this framework is useful in the sense that it encourages systems thinking. And so systems thinking also, I would like you to focus on the kind of the right-hand side of this diagram. In systems thinking, we tend to focus on the relationships. So remember concept maps and relationships, which is why concept maps are great for analyzing social ecological systems. Concept maps are great for fostering systems thinking. And in systems thinking, we tend to think about networks versus hierarchies. Even though earlier you saw that concept maps are strictly hierarchical in structure, but when you at a certain point in time, there will be network connections, meaning that the straight hierarchical connections will have links going across the hierarchies, and so that's where you begin to see in networks, right? And and for systems thinking, to adopt a systems thinking perspective, you want to think about processes versus structure. And processes, an example of process could be actually what Bill showed you in terms of the history of how we got here, because it was a process. It was a linear process. The process had causality. So in processes, you have, of course, cause and effect. And so that's one of the things that resemble what we are doing here. If I pull back again to the big picture, we are trying to model in as a concept map how you get from data, where my cursor is hovering over, how you get from data to decisions. Now that is a process, all right? So I'm gonna zoom into this last part of the diagram, modeling data to decisions processes. So in trying to model data to decisions, those of you folks who work in like the world of W3C Prov, now that's provenance. So we are trying to capture the provenance of transforming data to decisions at a fairly decent high level, which is where concept maps come in, because I wouldn't quite go into the full detail. If you had come to our introduction to the ontology session yesterday, there was an interesting discussion about using concept maps for certain types of applications where the applications are very, very specialized. I won't go into quite that too much now, but suffices to say that a knowledge graph can be used, like what we see here. This is not labeled. Oh yeah, what we see here on the bottom where my cursor is hovering. Knowledge graphs can be used to model and capture the process of converting data through code. This is the code part, means your models. Information is mostly referring to things like scientific publications and things like assessments, like our national climate assessments, right? Scientific assessments, to the decisions. Decisions might mean policy, it could mean management actions, it could mean a whole bunch of things. But this is an example of data-driven, science-informed decision making, and that's what we're trying to foster and capture using knowledge graphs. And we have a ESAB lab proposal now under consideration to try to model that knowledge graph, that kind of knowledge graph, using a labeled property graph database called Neo4j. I believe folks in NASA also use Neptune, Amazon Neptune as another labeled property graph database. We're trying to use Neo4j for this purposes. But let me stop here and take questions. I think we may have 2-3 minutes for questions. And I will keep the screen up here in case you guys have questions.
So, Brian, I might just add, I've seen some chatter actually on the live stream. Somebody was asking if your poster is available. So maybe just reiterating that is linked to in the session notes, and I believe it's also on Sketch, if folks want to take a closer look.
Yes, that's right. It's linked in the note session in your Slido. I have a question from Kathy. So the question from Kathy, I will read out. I'll read Kathy's question out. Kathy asks, by the way, Kathy is from University of Florida. She has a breakout session later focusing on soils. Kathy asks, do concept maps have a formal control vocabulary for the connection between concepts? That's an excellent question. The answer is no. The concept maps actually do not have a formal vocabulary for relationships slash linking words slash using predicates. Having said that, when we introduced the concept mapping competition in a very quick very soon, we would like you to be careful if you decide to draw concept maps. We like you to be careful about the types of relationships that you use to label your concept maps, because in concept mapping, unlike for ontology development often has a very strict set of relationships that you need to use, because in ontology development, you want your ontologies to be reasonable via machine algorithms. And so, which is why if you want it to be machine reasonable, you have to control your relationships. You have to control your linking words slash predicates slash relationships. So concept maps tend to be a little bit more lax in that sense. We're not going to impose a controlled set of vocabulary on you if you decide to draw a concept map for the competition. However, as you see here on the concept map, and as you saw in Bill's concept map also, I think we have been very careful to try to be consistent, and we ourselves try to be very limited and disciplined about what relationships we use. So for example, this relationship has part like you see here on the screen. Now that is actually a proper relationship used in ontologies. I won't go into too much detail, but has part as a proper connection, as a proper term. It has a very specific meaning to a machine. We are not trying, again, for the time being, these concept maps are not necessarily ingestible by a machine, and a machine cannot reason over the concept map. We don't think quite yet. There are methods which we are discussing in separate arenas to get machines to actually understand concept maps which are like these, which are not well constructed using controlled vocabularies. Bottom line for you guys is try to be disciplined about the words that you use for your nodes and your relationships in concept maps, but there's no controlled set vocabulary right now that we are aware of.
Hey, Brian, this is Bill. We still have other questions, but I think we need to go on. We'll get to these questions later in the second session. But we still let's do we should do the poll now, and then Catherine, will talk. Good. Okay. We are at 2:52 right now.
Okay, let's go on with the poll.
Let's do the poll. Yeah. So Charlie, we'll get back to your question.
So if you click on your Slido tab, I'm going to activate the first poll, which is the question that will appear on the Slido tab is, have you drawn concept maps in the past?
And for those of you who are watching the live stream, in the chat to the right of it, I just pasted a link. Hopefully it will get you to the poll.
Okay, sorry. We are at 23 responses, so let's close the poll now. Now, slightly more than half of you have worked on concept maps, which is great. So that there are about a quarter of you, just under a quarter, who have not. So we hope that with this introduction, you'll be motivated to actually start playing around with concept maps. Next poll, whoops, results are still coming in. Anyway, we have to move on to the next poll. So the next question that we want to ask you is the question of transdisciplinary work. Does your current work facilitate or encourage you to learn new topics outside your core skill areas? And while you're answering, the one of the motivations for asking this question is has to do with continuous adult learning and continuous learning, and part of it has to do with us as adults that we should technically, if our jobs allow us, to continually try to probe outside of our immediate areas and seeing how we can make connections. We can make connections, conceptual connections to other areas, which would actually technically lead to more cohesive solutions that we propose for like social ecological challenges. We have 21. So it's great. The poll results suggest that that there is a great quite a bit of at least for this crowd, this ISA crowd, a lot of you have had the chance to actually go and learn other areas. All right, let's move on to the third and last poll. Now, what scientific problem or societal challenge would you personally like to see developing such concept maps for, keeping in mind that earlier you said most of you said something about food security, and so we'd like to see if you still think that is true, and feel free to suggest other areas. Okay, so let me put a few comments, even though the results are still coming in. There have been a number of you who indicated more on the relationship between climate change and human health and vulnerable populations, and somebody even said inequality, right? So sustainable living, disaster response. Okay, so and multiple. So I think that's almost like a theme right now. You want to use concept maps to establish the linkage between climate change and human well-being, right? So that's one. For wildlife and biodiversity, resource management and wildlife disease, bird conservation, that's two. All right, and then we have, I'll roughly bring up one more high level summary of one of your, one more. Okay, so there is of course food security, food and water. Food security has come up a little bit here, not too much. That there is something about food security and COVID-19, which is interesting that we should get into. And I would classify the COVID and food supply maybe more with the climate, environmental change and human well-being. So we will take your responses and try to group them in some way, and that result will be available to all of you after the conference. Okay, let me stop the poll right now. And let's move on to the next part of the agenda. Bill, can you remind me? I'm having trouble with my agenda document. Okay, sorry. Next part of our agenda, we have Catherine Rowden. So, Catherine, I'm going to turn the screen over to you in a while, but before we do that, let me just give a quick introduction to Catherine. So Catherine Rowden is a National Weather Service hydrologist. She is a civil engineer by training, and Catherine has analyzed the aftermath of many fires, especially preparing for the aftermath of fires, things like potential for flash flooding. And so Catherine has worked very closely with many professionals from different backgrounds to assess the risks of these events, to inform the public and to warn the public of potential flash floods. And her presentation is very much almost related to what you might have heard from the plenary talk, Jocelyn Guz's talk. And so without further ado, let me turn the mic over to Catherine. Catherine.
Thanks, Brian. Let's see. Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks for that introduction. So yeah, I'm Catherine Rowden. I am our Western US Region Hydrology Program Manager for the National Weather Service. I'm also our National Post-Fire Hydrology Working Group leader. Because in the Weather Service, it's kind of a unique niche that we have to deal with the public watch warning mission. So just starting with a little background, and I'm sorry I missed the session this morning. I was actually on a call for a fire in Utah, so I missed that. So just a couple pictures to demonstrate. This is a beautiful mountain valley in eastern Washington in the North Cascade Mountains, the Eniat Valley, green and lush. And then the 2015 Wolverine fire raged through that valley, really changed the landscape. So from a post-fire hazard point of view, this is a great example just to see how the landscape changes. So what rain does on a pre-fire ecosystem compared to post-fire, I think this illustrates very well. You lose the tree canopy, well, not always, but in a case like this, loss of tree canopy, loss of the ground vegetation. So raindrops start traveling downhill very quickly, collect very rapidly, and you get larger peaks that arrive much quicker than pre-fire conditions. So just a comparison of a river flood, water through a river coming out of its banks, sometimes much more damaging than this picture. But in post-fire situations, we have debris flows and flash floods that are carrying ash, boulders, trees, cars, you know. And one of the really hazardous aspects of this is that they typically, or not typically, but often occur in places where people haven't experienced flooding at all before. So people that aren't in floodplains, people that sometimes aren't even by a stream channel as they spread out over an alluvial fan. So often takes folks by surprise, which is, it's very difficult from the social science standpoint. So when a fire happens, if it's on federal or tribal land, there is a burned area emergency response team that can respond if it meets a certain threshold. And their task is to determine the severity of the fire, areas that might be at risk of flooding and erosion, and what could be impacted by that. They can recommend mitigation actions. Sometimes there's nothing to do to mitigate in certain situations. They meet with the local stakeholders like emergency response officials, National Weather Service, to share what they found. It's an emergency response activity. They typically are start to finish 14 days or less. And typically they don't deploy until a fire is 80% contained, but with all of the very large and mega fires that we've had in the recent years, they, in a number of situations, are starting to deploy on parts of fires as the fires continue to burn and burn. So for federal and tribal lands, the Department of Interior and the U.S. Forest Service have a formal program to pay for these teams and institute some mitigation actions. But on state and private lands, besides California and most recently Washington, there is no formal assessment program for state and private lands. So there is a big gap there in knowledge of post-fire hazards, especially as these fires get larger that we've seen recently. So a little bit of background on what the BEAR teams do. They'll start with a remote sensing product, a comparison of pre and post-fire DNBRs, and the folks at GTAC and EROS in USDA and USGS create a burned area reflectance classification map. So that's the first estimate of the fire's intensity on the ground. And years ago, it was mostly just Landsat, and they've started using Sentinel much more, as I understand it, which is very helpful. It's helped fill in some gaps. So the BEAR teams take that satellite estimate and they hit the ground to kind of field validate it. So up in the upper corner, that's a low burn severity. There's still green on the ground. In the lower center, that would be moderate. So there's still some needles on the trees. Those can fall and create ground cover, because the actual raindrop impact on bare soil is one of the things that can create problems. So something as simple as pine needles that fall onto the ground can actually be very beneficial. And then in the upper right is a clear case of high burn severity. You've lost the soil structure or the root structure in the soils, so they're much more easily eroded. You have lots of ash that comes off, and that can change the quality of the runoff, and clearly nothing left alive there. And then hydrophobicity is another thing to look out for. The organics that burn in a fire can volatilize as they sink down into the soil and cool off. They can coat the soil particles with a waxy layer that repels water. And so when the BEAR teams are out there, they're looking for any hydrophobic layer and figuring out how deep that is. And it's a pretty interesting thing to see if you get to go out and stomp around in these burned areas and find an area, because you can almost have a pile of water just beaded up. These are pretty small beads, but you can get a pretty big surface tension on a large amount of water sitting on some of these hydrophobic areas. So in those spots, rainfall is basically sheeting off soil more like it was pavement than you would see pre-fire. So the BEAR teams, after they're done with that field work, they'll take that original satellite map that you see on the left and create a final soil burn severity product, which reflects the actual fire severity impacts on the ground. And then those teams take that information back to the office, or BEAR Den as they call it. And you have all types of specialties: botanists, engineers, hydrologists, archaeologists, coming up with mitigation actions, writing reports, modeling, etc. And they have all kinds of outputs: reports, maps, tables of pre versus post runoff, peak flow. If you're lucky, you'll get some really detailed modeling like the 2 images in the bottom with some 2D hydraulic models, which were actually done after the BEAR team, but providing really great information. And then something that's really useful, and we'll talk about more as I go, is the debris flow hazard maps that the USGS Landslide Hazards Program produces, which is likelihood of debris flow as well as a likely volume of possible debris flow. So we take all that information, potential mitigation actions for protective things are recommended, like in this instance on the left is some riprap being added to some banks. On the right is a picture of an emergency rain gauge. We have a lot of issues with detecting rainfall across the Western US where we have these issues. So that's often a recommendation. And just a lot of local meetings for planning on how we're going to keep folks safe, prepare, respond to these potential flood and debris flow events. So from the weather, so that's the BEAR team side, and that really lives in the land management agencies. But from the Weather Service side, one of the problems that we have is that more and more often we're finding the flood events are coming before we are getting that assessment from the BEAR teams, sometimes before the fire's out. These are all pictures of floods and debris flows that occurred before the fire was out, just in 2 counties in Washington State over a small number of years. And these are all pictures from the area that I worked in. This quote in the middle from my friend Annie: even in the most prepared communities with great resources, we are behind on life safety the moment the fire starts. And it's so true. It's just a very challenging area. The most famous recent one is the Thomas Fire. That picture is from December 2017 as they were battling that. And by January of 2018, those firefighters were rescuing people from the debris flow. And the fire was considered contained 3 days after that debris flow. Now they were fortunate, well, fortunate's not the right word. They were able to get some satellite imagery, and the USGS did their debris flow mapping before that event hit. And that, in my opinion, prevented more fatalities. And in this case, there were 23, or possibly 24. So I think there could have been many more fatalities had they not been able to get that information ahead of this event to use for messaging. So for the Weather Service, our mission is providing watches and warnings for weather and water. And in the post-fire realm, that's the flash flood warnings that we do for the debris flows and flash floods. For those that haven't seen a weather forecast office, this is what it typically looks like. They're staffed 24/7. They're there watching the storms. They're doing the forecast. They're issuing the warnings that send out, for flash floods and tornadoes. They alarm on your cell phones and whatnot. But there's so much uncertainty in the post-fire world. It's very challenging for our forecasters. So, like I mentioned, they have to warn on it whether we have any type of risk assessment from the BEAR teams at the time the storm arrives. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the underlying geology and hydrology science. A lot of that science has been focused in very specific areas in the country and has been applied then to everywhere, but it doesn't necessarily apply very well. So we use a lot of rules of thumb. Other layers of uncertainty, that how much rainfall will actually cause an event, and then how does that change in subsequent years? If we have a burned area that's now 2 years old, how much rain is going to cause a flash flood or a debris flow compared to that, first storm? And how much rain will fall? There's the forecast uncertainty, especially since we're talking about rainfall intensity, typically sub-hourly, that is of concern, which our models are still challenged by. They've come a long way in 10 years. And then how much rain has fallen. So we have a rainfall observation issue. And this picture here is radar coverage in Washington State, where good radar coverage is, or the large colored polygons. And what those red blobs are in the middle, where there is no radar or not good radar coverage, are some of the large and mega fires we had in Washington. And all those little pin icons are emergency rain gauges. So we are across the Western US challenged with observing the rainfall in these areas, which is often in mountainous areas. And then another uncertainty is how big will the flood or debris flow be and what will the impact be? So are we talking about nuisance flooding across a road or boulders through a living room? And what will the public do with the information? So you take all this uncertainty and you're trying to craft a message to get the public to take life-saving action and hope that you've got it right, you know, because there's also the cry wolf thing where if we overwarn, they start to disregard these messages. So this is an example of why sometimes we don't have information. This is Washington State in 2015. We had 1 million acres burn, and we had numerous bear teams on the ground, but no satellite image to work from, because every time Landsat would pass, this is what the skies look like for a number of passes. It was just too smoky to get any information. So there's a number of reasons why we are sometimes operating with little to no information, trying to warn on these events. So there's a number of things we're focused on to reduce uncertainty, and this is just the very tip of the iceberg to maybe get people thinking about things. There's a lot of layers under this and people talking and working. But one of the main things a lot of us, and by us I mean other agencies that work in this, is that would help is a comprehensive database of historical events for both flash floods and debris flows with the accompanying rainfall impacts. And it's a large effort if it's done manually. So those folks that are good at database scraping and machine learning, I think there's a lot of potential here. And storm direction is a really key factor as well. And more social science, we're really trying to save lives here. So we constantly need more information there. And in those areas where we are struggling without information, we're really working towards having pre-fire or some kind of tool that can help us estimate, you know, whether it's just infrastructure maps in a watershed that we can pull up and say, oh, we have a gas pipeline that runs under this channel, or this is how close and vulnerable these homes are to this alluvial fan, those types of things, which is really should, in theory, be a simple mapping type exercise, but I've yet to see anybody pull it off during a fire. And then, of course, always working towards better rainfall forecasts and observations. And then for the Weather Service, better research to operations mechanisms. That's a big one. We have a lot of meteorology expertise and folks that work on that in the Weather Service, but post-fire hydrology is such a niche that we know of a lot of things that are happening, but not a lot of support to bring those into our Weather Service operations. And so to get to the definitions, flash flood or debris flow, it matters. I stole from the USGS debris flow group. All other things being equal, debris flows are definitely worse than flash floods. And if you've been in the field to see this, you have seen that. Debris flows, for the same amount of rainfall inputs, debris flows can be 5 times higher than the flood. They can travel much faster and arrive with much greater force. They carry more sediment, more boulders, etc. So much more hazardous. And the other thing about debris flows is that they found through the research that they're triggered instantaneously when the rainfall intensity exceeds a certain threshold. So whereas flash floods, you need a certain amount of rainfall over a period of time, debris flows just need to exceed a threshold and they trigger. So taking those differences, that debris flow terminology has only become widely used within the Weather Service in the last 10 years or so. And I'll explain why that's important in a minute. And then on the social science side, does the public understand these differences and what their true risk is and what they need to do to mitigate it? And also, is there consistency amongst the experts? And I put that in quote because really I'm talking about all of these federal and state and NGOs that are messaging to the public on these hazards that the public looks to as experts, whether they are or not. So within the Weather Service, we are challenged by consistency. Like I said, the term debris flow has only been widely used, and there is not been a great deal of consistency in how it's been used. So things that go into our warnings are call to action statements, what folks should do to stay safe. It's used variably there in local storm reports and our national storm database, which are great things to data mine for something like a historical event record. There's no consistency there. So that really hampers these efforts to do data collection and event analyses looking backwards. So we are really working internally to make that better. And we have had external partners come to us to support science research as well as policy development on this post-fire hazard, because we do have this national storm database and these local storm reports. And it's been disappointing how little we've been able to help those efforts because of this lack of consistency within the Weather Service. And then consistency amongst federal state partners, that has an impact as well. We did successfully partner with USGS and California GS to improve the ready.gov messaging on debris flows. Before that, there was a lot of mixing and matching with landslides to the point where one geologist said it was actually life-threatening, the type of advice they were giving on that website. But here's where policy comes into play. The FEMA National Flood Insurance Program policy language does not mention debris flows anywhere. So if you look at FEMA's post-fire infographics that they have they've spent a lot of money on, they mention flash floods and mud flows, and nobody else messages mud flows. So there's a lack of consistency that's partly based on poor definition in national policy. And because at the end of the day, saving lives is really, what a lot of us care about in this field. It's important to get consistency, because you talk to the social scientists and they say consistent messaging is really the easiest, most baseline expectation to increase public understanding of these threats. And we still have a long ways to go on that front. And just to say, for the social science side, this is the debris flow in Montecito in 2018. The difference, for instance, between a flash flood and debris flow, if you have a flash flood warning, folks that live on a channel that might be familiar with flash floods might decide to grab their cup of coffee and go stand on their deck and watch it, flow out of the banks like they're used to, compared to a debris flow like this that triggers instantaneously and brings boulders through their living room. So again, definitions in this area do matter. And that's all I have for the presentation.
Thanks, Catherine. We have a question. Sorry, this is Brian. We have a question from Terry Soul. I'm going to read out Terry's question to you. Terry is curious about post-fire vegetation regeneration and how that process is incorporated on changing risk calculation over time.
Great question. So right now it's not, because the resources are not there to go reassess these burn scars year after year. There's barely enough resources to do the post-fire assessments as it is. So that's something that could be done if there were resources. And I know some folks are working on remote sensing. I think their research is focused on California, but I couldn't say for certain. So what types of remote sensing products can they look at that is tied to actual burn scar recovery? Because it's not just vegetation regrowth, it's soil structure stability, all these things that affect the hydrologic response and how it recovers. So, in Colorado, typically we say 3 to 5 years to recovery. In Colorado, they have a burn scar that's still producing large floods 20 years after the fire. So that's an area that we all need a lot of help in. I'll just say that.
And Catherine, I don't know if you see Xiong Wan's question in the chat. She asks, how do you quantify post-fire hydrophobic condition? What kind of components need to be considered?
How do you quantify? So that depends on everybody does it a little differently. I'll say there are some guidelines, and you can find it. I think it's the Forest Service has a Bear Team guidebook online, and it documents how to measure hydrophobicity. And so one of the things you do is you look at different soil depths to see, like, is it hydrophobic? Is it at the surface? And then you scrape away a little bit and you check at multiple depths, because sometimes that layer is formed very deep. And depending on who is doing who is guiding that bear team, let's say, in their perspective. Some folks do a time test, like you count how long it takes that water to infiltrate the soil. But I've talked to some very experienced bear hydrologists with decades of experience, and they say basically if it doesn't infiltrate right away, it's going to run off. So it really, there's some differences there.
Can I ask a question? This is Jonathan Blythe.
Yeah, Jonathan, I think you get our last question.
Great. I'll try to make it short. So just in thinking of the Weather Service approach to this, it sounds almost like it's focused right at the disaster stage in terms of response. But it seems like if we want to think about this from a process perspective, there's two approaches, like doing pre-fire surveying to see susceptibility to this kind of flow should a fire occur in that area. I mean, that kind of modeling occurring to understand the conditions on the ground. Like we know already there's mitigation they can do to clear out wood before a fire to make it less of a burn. And then from socioeconomic perspective, are there relationships where some communities are more vulnerable to these and you pointed out Montecito, which, I don't know, sometimes it's the most, the people who are, have the most wealth can be at the front lines of vulnerable communities, like on shorelines in Cape Cod, they're most susceptible to sea level rise. So do you have any modeling of socioeconomic factors that would predispose communities to this vulnerability?
So I will talk about the pre-fire piece first. So that's something that a lot of people have been really trying to get to is let's find before the fire the most vulnerable areas from a post-fire standpoint, and can we direct the forest mitigation dollars there? So if you have two equivalent watersheds, in the same state of, let's call it disrepair, and that I'm not a forester, so I don't know what they would call it, but forests that need treatment, and one is the municipal water supply and the other isn't. It would make sense to put those treatment dollars on the municipal water supply, or if that's the one that has the nursing home below it, or if it's got a whole community and this one doesn't. So that's definitely where the focus is slowly turning. So those of us that have worked in post-fire, we're like, we have to do this. But the folks that have just traditionally looked at, statewide forestry treatment, 20-year plans, it's not so much in the front of their minds, but it is slowly working there. The USGS has some papers out now on how to do pre-fire debris flow hazard assessments. And there are a few communities across the country that have done some of that, but so it's a slowly growing movement, but it's very important. And on the vulnerability side, I haven't seen that specifically addressed or talked about. I mean, I would assume it would be part of a discussion if you were doing a pre-fire assessment to look at those factors, but having not specifically been part of one, I don't know.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for your questions. We are running behind time, actually, thanks to me. But what I'd like to do here is to maybe encourage, if you have further questions, one possibility is to get together with Catherine after the break. And because Catherine, we will have one breakout session focused on wildfires. But before we all disappear for the break, we're going to bring Bill Tang back on to talk about the competition that we would like to announce here. And Bill, Ellie was, oh, okay, and I'm reading my messages right now. So I'll tell you what, let's do this. Bill, would you like to just very quickly introduce the competition, and maybe if folks would like to read up more, they have a link to the competition prospectus and that way they can look at the competition prospectus over the break. Bill?
Yeah, so I'll just take a couple of minutes. You can all read the prospectus and over the break, take your time to do that, but do look through it in the detail. I'll just highlight a couple of, well, a few important points here. So why we're doing this is that it really aligns with, again, this key goal of ESOP, which is the transdisciplinary aspect. So that's why we thought the competition would be a good way to motivate everybody. The due dates, so the key due date is September 8th. So within a couple months from now. And then the selection will be decided by the end of September, end of the fiscal year. And also do take some time to read over the eligibility, the requirements there. We will have a Q&A in our August monthly telecom on the 4th of August, Tuesday, where if you have any questions you may have about the competition in whatever shape or form, that'll be our devoted to that. And then the winning teams, there'll be 3 top winners. They should expect to form the core of a session for the upcoming winter meeting next January in hopefully, but no, actually that's also be virtual. So that's it. And then in part 2 of the session, right after the break, the coffee break, when we break off into the individual groups, that could be an opportunity to initiate a submission idea. So that's optional, of course. And that's it. And please make sure that well, I guess we have all the registrants list, because post meeting we'll be sending additional information announcements to whoever's on the registration list for this session today regarding the competition.
Okay, and I guess with that, we should move into our break, but one last word to the folks. After we come back at 4 p.m. Eastern time, we will be immediately launching into trying to organize some breakout sessions. Now you have on your via the agenda notes a link to a very short PowerPoint slide deck. It's only 5 slides and not too many words in it. It gives you a rough idea of the kinds of breakouts. We have 3 breakouts already planned, and there are possibilities of having additional breakout groups. So we're going to try to settle that after we come back from the break. But do take a look at that PowerPoint slide. Again, follow the link from your detailed agenda. There is a word cloud in that PowerPoint slide that is generated from your response to the Slido poll, your last response, where we asked you if you had the chance to draw a concept map to document a data to decisions traceable flow, what kinds of societal challenge would you like to draw that map on? So that has been condensed into a word cloud. It's available on that slide deck pointed to in the agenda, last slide. So take a look, I guess, and we will reconvene in half an hour. Ali, Megan, have I missed anything?
I just want to say, for those of you who aren't staying for the second half, thank you for joining us. And the second session will be made available later, so you can catch it then. From a logistical perspective, when we break, people are welcome to continue talking here. The live stream may be paused, but we will start back again at 4 o'clock Eastern time. And you're welcome to just mute and turn off your camera and take your break and then come back when you're ready.
Thanks, Megan.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
So
Ryan, I just came back from a short break. Have we broken out into the Zoom rooms yet?
Nope, we have not.
Okay. And where's the list for number 1, 2, and 3?
Oh, we have not come to that yet.
Oh, okay. Okay, never mind. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. We will actually start extremely soon. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, I was going to just comment on that. If it helps in assigning, do we want to ask people to put the number in front or after their name? That you just put it in front, I put it after.
Oh.
If that matters.
As long as it's apparent, I think it's
okay. Okay.
4 might be ever so slightly easier, but it's not a big deal.
Uh-huh.
So maybe I should start now, and should I start now?
Yeah. I'm gonna switch.
Okay. Okay, so hopefully, folks, you are back at your desks and back online on Zoom. So what we're going to do here within the next 20 minutes, and by the way, welcome if you have just joined us for part 2 of the session. What I'm going to do is, at this point, we're going to just share with you very quick information about the breakout groups that we can organize ourselves into. So there are 3 predetermined breakout groups already, but you should think about if those 3 breakout groups do not meet your interests or needs, you should think about suggesting breakout groups that you would be interested in leading or participating in. So your tasks are to pick a group. If you look at your screen, pick a group, prefix the group number to your Zoom name, and we will show you how to do that. If you look at some of us, if you look at my name on the Zoom screen, I have a number 3 in front of my name. Bill Teng has a number 2 in front of his name. Ellie Davis has a 3 in front of her name, and so on and so forth. And Ashton has a group 3, number 3 in front of her name. So I will show you how to rename yourselves if you're not familiar with, but that's what we're trying to do, so that once you indicate your group of interest, Megan can help assign you to your preferred breakout group. Now, once you're in a breakout group, there is a template for you to take notes in. There is a link to the template from your detailed agenda. So each breakout group has its own template outline. So there is one template for group 1, one template for group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5. So go down the list. And then within your group, identify a speaker of the group. That speaker will be responsible for a report out at 5:15 Eastern time. 5:15, right? Though, yeah. 5:15 Eastern time for 2 minutes. So your group will actually report out in 2 minutes. So the 2 minute report out is only 3 main takeaway points, not too hard, right? So if you look at your screen, the next screen is yes. So group number 1, is led by Kathy Todd Brown from University of Florida. She's leading a group to talk about the conceptual challenges with fusing and integrating soil data related to, especially if you're talking about soil carbon, because there are different ways that people measure soil carbon, and that sometimes leads to challenges when you're trying to fuse data from different sources. So Kathy is going to talk a lot about that in her group. Catherine Rowden, whom you have just heard from before the break, she's going to lead on wildfire-related issues. And we will leave you guys within a group to figure out if you're going to do, post-fire, pre-fire, what is the time frame you're going to do recovery after fire for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. We will leave that up to Catherine and the group. Group 3, led by David Achter, we're going to talk more about connecting data to policy. And so actually Catherine, in her talk, she had mentioned an interesting aspect of I think she mentioned the National Flood Insurance Program, or was it something else? But it's national, it's law at the US level, which does not have the correct language that needs to be responsive to things, to disasters. So that's a policy issue, but how do you, for example, use data to connect to policy issues like that? And that will be led by David after. We will, in that session, we will also be talking a little bit about, perhaps, depending on the interest of the group, talking about bird conservation a little bit and how to use data. We might also talk about wind energy in Texas and how do you use data to inform the placement of windmills in Texas. So those are potential topics within group 3. We can spin off additional ad hoc groups, and that's where you will come in a while. You will go to your Slido poll in a while if you have additional groups that you want to suggest. So you may form your breakout groups to discuss ideas for a competition concept map, or if you have your own project, like in group 1, Kathy is already leading her project. You could also form a breakout group to discuss something of your own interest. So there are many ways that we can do this, right? The deliverables, I will not go through these in detail. We don't have time. Suffice to say, that information of what is in your template, you can find it in the link in the detailed agenda. But we want you to focus on listing what your scientific challenges are, listing what are the core concepts within those scientific challenges that you need to define if you were to draw a concept map, and then your 3 takeaway points. And again, these are the groups, 1, 2, 3, and additional ad hoc groups. Again, give me a second. I will activate the poll that you can use to enter, to suggest new groups, right? And if you're not familiar with the Zoom and how to rename yourself, here is a graphic on the lower right-hand side of the screen. So if you hover over your own icon and you click on the 3 dots, you can rename yourself. But Megan, did you have instructions?
Another option is in the participant window to the right of your name. There's a button for more, which you can click and find the rename there. Sometimes the dots next to the face aren't, I don't know, sometimes rename is not there.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. So if you would like to, so what will happen is if you rename as you rename yourself, Megan will start assigning you to groups. If you choose not to number yourself yet, and if you want to suggest additional groups, go back to your Kiko chat screen, go to your Slido, and I will try to activate the survey now, where you can enter what groups you would like to suggest. But as you're thinking, this is the word cloud that you specified in your last poll. The last poll, you were asked to indicate, if you were to draw a data to decisions concept map, what are the issues which you might want to work on? And these are your responses. So if you're looking around for ideas, if you don't want to join groups 1, 2, or 3, here are some suggestions. And the poll for suggesting additional breakout groups is now live. Go back to your Kiko chat, click on the Slido tab, and you are free to enter suggestions for alternate breakout groups. And I'll hang around to see if anybody has questions. I'm sorry, one thing about timing. We have about 10 more minutes that we can dedicate to this. So within the next 10 minutes or sooner, either choose a breakout group or suggest a breakout group. So 10 minutes from now, you have to indicate a group. You have 10 minutes.
Hey, Brian, I was wondering if I could pitch the soil carbon group a little bit more in detail. So what I was hoping to use this group for would be to talk about how to use soil carbon, or how to use concept maps to both describe the data that we need in order to better understand soil carbon dynamics, and also to talk about how to use concept maps to clarify those measurements that are taken. So for example, documenting the different ways that we measure bulk density, or the different ways that phosphorus are characterized, and things along those lines. So loosely, that was what I was hoping to get out of group one. If folks in the breakout room had other ideas, I would be delighted to hear them.
So as folks on the line think about what groups they would want to join, again, on your screen, you should be seeing what you suggested as ideas or data, the decisions, concept maps. On the right-hand side of the screen, right now are the suggestions for additional breakout groups. One of the suggestions is long-term ecological monitoring data to decisions.
So Brian.
Jessica.
Okay, sorry, just making sure you can hear me. So I actually proposed that one, and I don't want it to overlap too much with number 3, so please let me know if it does. But my idea here was that we could discuss how individual programs, for example, I've posted a link to a mind map that I've created for the North American Breeding Bird Survey. If we can create a concept map that allows individual programs like the Breeding Bird Survey to maybe more systematically or automatically track how their data is being used in various places, not only in policy and decision making, but also just generally on the interwebs.
Okay, so Jessica, could we generalize that? Wait, so the specific use case would be still on breeding bird data, right?
Or some other very similar, like long-standing ecological monitoring program, right? So the idea here would be that the use would be for a specific group or program or institution to track one of their products.
Okay.
And again, perhaps that aligns too much with number 3.
We could make it align with number 3. Yes, we could.
That wouldn't be a bad fit. We have some topics in number 3, specifically that Brian had mentioned about wind energy and relation to land use and farming and environmental conditions and policy. Bird migrations are actually a factor in placement of windmills, wind farms, and or should be. So there's some overlap, and we're not going to solve any one of these in that session, but we'll talk about them. That makes sense.
That's a good observation, David. Jessica?
Yeah, I'm down with whatever. It is a little bit different in that it sounds like you're specifically discussing policy, which I'm totally cool with. My interests just lie a little bit more so on facilitating programs or institutions or data product owners to better or more comprehensively understand where their work is going. But again, I can go wherever.
Well, what I'm thinking is I only see a couple of people besides myself in number 3. And so we may have bandwidth to talk about more than one topic. And and there is a relation, but if you were to put a 4 on yours and then more people joined that, then that would give an indication. I don't know. I'm open.
Yeah, I don't want to slow up this process anymore. So
yeah.
What is the reference to policy? Because that.
Well, the reference to policy is for instance, any state, local government, or even perhaps industry regulation. Well, I guess that does come back to governance. Policies that where you have environmental data and you have some subject domain and you have data about that domain. How do you what processing, what thought processes do you go through to translate that into meaningful policy? And how would you use concept maps to describe that? We still have a few people that haven't given haven't exercised their choice. And
I can also work with them after you go off to the breakout rooms to see if they couldn't figure out how to indicate or don't want to go to a breakout room or what.
Okay.
Unless they'd like to talk about if they have a question.
Yeah, and Megan, I think I can stay with you because I suspect we have 3 more minutes, and I think we have stabilized in terms of most of us have indicated rooms. So if it's easier for you, you can even feel free to assign people to breakout groups now.
Okay, so it looks like we'll have 5 people in room 1, 9 people in room 2, 6 people in room 3. And then we have these 5 people who I might talk to for a minute to see if they have a preference. But whenever you're ready for the rooms to be opened, how long would you like people to stay in them?
For 55 minutes. I think that was the timing. Hang on, let me verify. Bill, could you?
Yeah, it is 55.
55 minutes.
Yeah, starting at 4:15, 4:20.
You say 55?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So just a quick preview. All of you guys, as soon as Megan hits the button, you will be assigned to your breakout groups, and you will stay in your room for 55 minutes. By which time your 3 takeaway points should be ready. And at the end of the 55 minutes, everybody will be brought back here, and then we have the report out. Any questions? If not, yeah, I think we can start.
Okay, and you can always come back to the main room if you have questions or you'd rather go somewhere else. Jonathan, I see your note, but I'll move you in a second. Okay. See you soon, everyone. So let me just.
Did I go to room 1 or still I'm here?
You are still here. Who are you, Arif?
Yes.
All right. You didn't put a name next to yours, so I didn't know to move you, but I will do that right now.
Thank you.
Sorry for the few of you who are waiting. Chris, I see you. So David, David R., are you participating in the breakouts?
Megan Chongming, I answer go to room 3.
Okay, I'll put you there now.
Thank you.
How about Gary?
I'm for room 1.
Okay. All right, so Brian, it's just you, me, and David in the room right now. So if you want to go to any of the breakouts, I can move you there, or you can move yourself there.
Oh yeah, I will try moving myself magically. Let me try to figure this out. Not sure. Oh, I think I need help. How do I?
Hello, everyone. This room is very silent.
Hi,
No.
Reese. How are you?
We are
muted.
we are doing good. We just finished our soil-related group and back.
How's your conference been so far? First day.
It has been busy, actually.
Yeah.
Which is a good sign. This means the system is working.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely lots of chances for
I always find there's so many exciting things go on that I go in several different directions at once. Can't keep up.
I had a little bit of problems with getting the times right. I am not in my normal time zone, so that was a little bit of a figuring that out.
Oh no, I had another conference in Mountain Time, and so my calendar was all sorts of messed up.
Yeah, normally I'm in like Texas time, and right now I'm in Mountain Time, so I'm just like, I don't know when anything is, and everything's recorded in Eastern Time.
Oh no.
I figured it out, obviously, but.
Well, it'll be better tomorrow.
Eastern time is sort of like English. It assumes it's the standard.
If you live in the Eastern Zone.
Yeah, that's right.
The Yankee snobs. I'm from the South, you can't tell.
Hey, we're in the South too, okay? I might be a Yankee snob in the South, but it's all the same.
I wasn't promoting
just
Eastern
joke.
time with my comment.
All right, so Brian, Bill, what's next?
Bill's next.
Bill, I think we can't tell if you're trying to talk because the camera's at your nose.
Bill is muted. Bill is still muted.
Sometimes he randomly disappears and comes back, so it's okay.
Okay, I finally found the unmute button. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
We can hear you.
Okay.
But we can still only see you from your nose up.
Yeah, I don't have a separate. It's the camera that's on my laptop. Yeah, I have to get one that points upward that you all have. Many of you have. So Brian, I guess the next thing is to report out, right, from each of the groups, 2 minutes each on the 3 takeaways.
Yep.
So let's go down the number, starting with group number 1. Kathy's group.
Sure. So we talked about soil carbon and reasons for being interested in soil carbon stocks from both a agricultural perspective, especially when you're looking at it in the context of nutrient cycling and water retention, as well as from a climate perspective as a reservoir for atmospheric CO2. We talked that concept maps could or should include something along the lines of how carbon is cycled through the soil, maybe how soils are formed, so soil formations, and then thinking about what the procedure is for going from sampling to taking a measurement to quantify the different constituents that make up soils. And then we started thinking a little bit about how to engage next steps moving forward with domain experts, and we mocked up a quick list of different soil concepts that we could throw at folks to help get the conversation started and getting them to chew on things with. And I would like to take some time to thank the folks who showed up for thank both Gary and Sing Wong and Arif who helped us all come together and think about this a little bit. And I'm stumbling over my words, so I'm going to pass this off back to you, Bill. Sorry.
Thanks, Kathy. So let's see, I gotta find my page here. I guess, yeah, so we didn't actually designate a person to report on, but I guess I can do that. So group number 2, which is on wildfires. So we did have subject matter experts in Catherine and also Jacqueline. And we actually, the discussion kind of focused on both the post-fire emergency community, the short term, in a matter of days and weeks, versus the longer term post-fire recovery community represented by Jacqueline's work. So the 3 takeaways that we ended up with, and we had a lot of discussion about how concept map can actually help in this area. So we went back to starting with the needs of the user, and then what are the problems we're trying to address. So the 3 takeaways is that there's a definitely lack of information about relevant historical data, in particular comprehensive historical data, such as the event archive. And I mean, there are these archives around, but they're not in no way comprehensive or interoperable or harmonized across archives. The second related thing is that there's a lack of interaction, exchange of data, information, knowledge between the post-fire emergency community and the longer-term recovery community, and that's something that perhaps a concept map exercise can help identify the gaps. And then the third takeaway is that in order for the first 2 to be effective, we need consistent, harmonized, interoperable data in all these cases. So those are the 3 takeaways from us, and we didn't really get into what follows. We'll have to do that after the meeting. Okay, so group number 3. David?
I'll be presenting the group.
Okay.
Thought it was a really intriguing talk. I think a lot of us came in without a lot of experience. So it sounds like we were able to work through our some of these concepts pretty well. And there were some really good examples throughout. I think our 3 takeaway points. Well, we started off with that we needed more time because there's a lot going on and this discussion was going really well. So we're planning for that in the future, I think. Number 1 would be concept maps are easy to make, but hard to make useful. Trademark just with Burnett. The idea there being that we want to make sure that when they're developed, there needs to be some consistent vocabulary or ontology, or I always use the word lexicon, but maybe that's not appropriate here. So that anybody that reads it understands it in the context that the vocabulary being used is meant to be interpreted. I think a good example, we talked about the different definitions for energy or conservation, depending on the perspective of who's using that term, between scientists, policymakers, and the public. The second thing was that concept maps benefit from being capable of evolution, cycling back around on themselves, and working off of, like, if a policy is implemented, how that will affect sort of the top-down process, say for the scientific investigation, and be able to adapt. Therefore, tools are required to allow some form of user commenting to the concept map and editing. So that might be something that's worked out at a time with the people developing amongst the people developing the map itself. And then the third was that it would benefit from buy-in from all stakeholders along the length of the chain, maybe not complete buy-in from everybody, but at least a general agreement that the workflow is a way that will work for the moment. And again, it can evolve. Therefore, one thought was that a concept map is context specific and maybe not intended to be a scientific exercise. So giving it some additional value in the long run. And that was it for the main points.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on any of the three groups? So, so at 5 minutes, I think I'm gonna. I think what I heard, across all three is that there needs to be a purpose to any kind of concept map, right? So we actually in group number 2, we struggled out with a little bit, like what is it that a concept map is meant to do? So given that, once you define that, then you can take the next step to compile your concepts that are relevant to that problem, and then start mapping the relationship and so on. So that's I think something that's common across the groups. I take it that none. Well, I don't know. Is any of the group planning to submit to the competition, or are people thinking to do this, afterwards, or to form groups afterwards to do that? So that's just something to keep in mind. The next steps, right? So again, the competition due date, if you are interested, is September 8th for the submission, and please do read the competition prospectus for the details. And if you want to be apprised of the information, the announcement that will be coming out related to competition, but also related to the next steps coming from this session, and particularly the next monthly telecon of the cluster in August 4th. Let's see. I guess everybody's. Yeah, I said this already. Everybody's name is already on the list, so we have that list, and so we will be. Yeah, never mind what I just said. So we'll be sending all the information and announcement to whoever is on that list. Okay. Anybody has additional synthesis of what they heard from the three groups?
Bill, I guess I'm just wondering where the ag climate might go from here. It seems like there's a wide range of topical areas, and so I'm wondering, you're going to meet monthly and have discussion topics? Yeah, so we routinely have that monthly meeting the first Tuesday of every month at 3 p.m. Eastern. The next one in August, we will devote it to a Q&A related to the competition. Anybody who has questions. But going forward, in terms of the topics, so we will be continuing this concept map / knowledge graph / ontology work. Now, so far we'll be focusing on wildfire because that's of interest, and also working with Dave's group, disaster lifecycle, and also Catherine, is something that's topical. It's important, so that's why we focus on it. But of course, the technologies are not, obviously specific to wildfire. So we will be both
continuing down the path of applying the technology to the wildfire domain, but also developing technology in general for other applications. The other parallel path is kind of agriculture and machine learning that Arif helped us get started a couple of years ago back in Tucson, and also back in this January when we had that planning meeting as to what we want to do in that space. And that, of course, overlapped quite a bit with this whole concept map work that we've been doing. In fact, the direction we're going with the concept map is eventually applying the machine learning methods to actually build these applications, for example, for a smarter search engine. So that's kind of a quick summary of what we have in mind right now. And that's why we asked that question earlier in the poll, what people have, what people would like to see us do, whether they get involved with the cluster or not. And that food security thing is definitely something we're going to be looking into.
Indeed. So the machine language, and hearing lots of echo, the machine learning and direction can be seen in two aspects. One is what Bill said, as in you can apply machine learning to the concept maps and knowledge maps, and maybe integrate in ontologies, right, for better searches and better recommendation engines. In fact, that's actually how in the real world, Pierre Buttigieg, who's on the Semantic Tech Committee, he showed an example actually of how ontologies and some aspects of machine learning and natural language processing are integrated for recommendation. The other aspect is this. If you think about food security, some of you have highlighted, one interesting way to go is as part of the value chain of a concept map, we want to investigate how it would be interesting to investigate how various people are using machine learning to analyze, for example, geospatial data, right, remotely sensed data, or even in situ data, but time series data that is geospatial, and apply machine learning to detect, for example, emerging threats in terms of potential crop failures because of a change of environmental conditions. Because one of the folks in our breakout session who works kind of in the national security area had indicated, these things are of interest. I mean, I'm extrapolating a little bit from food security to national security, but definitely there is that there is that aspect which is amenable to machine learning methods. So again, machine learning, I think there are two ways to look at it, right? Better search and discovery of related data and information, and the other one is how do you use machine learning to better predict instances where there might be national security issues because of food security.
That also gets into our automated agriculture related areas, which we have been looking into quite a bit, and there are lots of interesting studies on that. Lots of different universities.
Brian, I'm really interested in these ideas you're tying together, food security, machine learning, and so on. So that's something this cluster is going to be tackling in the near future, or is that a long-term plan?
If you guys yell hard enough and loud enough, I guess we will do it.
Well, I'm only saying that because I think it'd be better to point to a group who's actually doing it, and then I'm not saying anything against what you guys are working on now. You are where you are, but maybe we could look at the national security data groups or the people who are doing intelligence where they're using machine learning now. I know Jason comes from that world. Maybe they have lessons that we can learn from.
I would agree.
This is Gary.
Gary,
I just want to make a quick comment on how I can think of machine learning helping us a bit here. We know that we have problems sharing data across different sort of earth sciences, different disciplines. And partly it's because they have different vocabularies, and that is reflected in how they describe their data and so forth, what they name it, and that type of thing. I think machine learning could potentially be a help here in looking at the ways that different communities do discuss these things. So actually going back to their research reports, we can sort of pull out the vocabularies and things of that nature. And then we can also use machine learning to essentially do sort of something like entity resolution. That is to say, these things sit in very similar conceptual spaces, and therefore they may be the same thing. And by the way, if we put these together, we have a bigger picture. So I think that's one of the ways that we can sort of, Arif, for example, might help us with the interoperability, data interoperability, and different terminology issues.
Indeed. So if you mix in what Jonathan said about, again, food security and national security, and using machine learning to parse the various information that are out there to help spot patterns, despite the ambiguity in language, I think that would be a very rich area.
I also think, so there's both the remote sensing side of agriculture, food security for machine learning, and then there's also the aspect of like food security once it's in the hands of like a food bank or a grocery store. And I know that there has been work that's been done on that side, but I don't know if machine learning has been addressed or been used to address it. Just like connecting people to food when there are excesses in areas.
There might be a use case around food insecurity involving some other concepts that where we know that there is some problem sharing data. And if we had a use case like that, then we might develop that and attack that by things like machine learning to see if we can bridge the gap.
And a concept map might be useful because it could connect everything from the ground to the consumer.
Yeah, it'd be a way of telling us what are all the relevant things in the concept map. And it'd be a job of then getting a representative sample of some of the literature in each of those things to see if we then could use that as the training set and the target set to see if we could bridge different parts of that conceptual graph.
And be able to identify who's working in each of those areas.
Yeah, and also food security is also at different scales, right? So I think what Ellie, what you're talking about is more on local or community or regional level, and when you get to the global, international, it's dealing with different players, but they all are connected at some point. So at the global level, USDA, the Foreign Ag Service, for example, which is the agency that I came from before I went to NASA. So we still do a lot of work with them. And so if we were to kind of move down in that direction, and by the way, what we're doing is really not that far away from food security, right? It's just kind of an application of what we're doing. So we can certainly reach out to them for interest and collaboration.
And I think because we had previously, or I had said like COVID and food security, and I think that's an example of where the very global issue of COVID, which then propagated down into supply chain issues and also into like factories needing to close because of workers being sick, all of that then goes into a very local impact, as well as obviously there are a lot more impacts in that. But I think, are we being kicked off?
I think the subway's here.
The door closing on us.
Don't know what that was.
Just one last thought on that, if I could finish. So yeah, a lot of times the food security is not so much the lack of food, right? It's more distribution, the other societal, political factors involved, rather than just the lack of the food itself. So that's also something that gets put into the whole calculus. Okay, I'm done.
So you guys are welcome to stay and keep talking, but I'm going to end the recording. So if there's anything that you want to be at the end beyond what's already been said, now's the time for it.
Bill, can I just say on the same place in the Kiko chat is next to notes and then Sketch is the 3 takeaways. We have filled them in, but if people have any other input, that's the place where it is, and take a look at it, make sure we captured the whole thing.
Okay, yeah, well, Brian and I would definitely will go through all the documentation stuff, make sure that they're all, they're all taken care of. Thanks.
And one, you guys have actually raised a lot of interesting points. I think we should definitely especially this food security AI stuff, we should capture this somewhere, and let all of you see it and edit it, so that it informs our thinking of where we want to take the cluster next.
Right. Yeah. Good. And the cluster is the cluster are the members, right? So if you're interested, it's what we make it to be. Right? So please join us if you want to push any of these topics.
And just because we did not, again, we don't want to leave anybody behind, as in, some of the other topics still are issues. So the soils is definitely one topic that we will continue. Differences in data collection methods and how those affect decisions at the end, that hits, for example, Jason Ferrante, the issues that you brought up, and of course, Jessica, the issues that you brought up there are also relevant. And also, actually, even Kathy's applications in soils are affected by differences in the way data is observed and collected. So that'll be another one of the themes that will continue. The food security, I think maybe another theme, again, machine learning. Somehow we will try to find parallel and cross-cutting themes somehow. I'm not sure what the architecture is going forward, but we will try to make an architecture so that all of you have a spot on that architecture, and the architecture tells us how concept maps can be used to solve your favorite problem, maybe.